RevDLHelfer to our pulpit. RevDLHelfer was ordained in the Unitarian Universalist ministry in 2014. They currently serve the ministry at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of South County in Peacedale, Rhode Island. RevDLHelfer was called to ministry after 2 decades of work in the environmental field. They are passionate about social and environmental issues. They have faith in the inclusivity, dedication, and passion of the Unitarian Universalism has and will continue to play an important role in building beloved communities. All right.
Let's see who was lighting the chalice, but that was beautiful. I'm Reverend DL. I am so glad to be here with you today. Please join us in singing hymn number 151, I Wish I Knew How. Get comfortable in your pew, to have your feet firmly on the floor perhaps, to lower your gaze or close your eyes, and we'll have a brief spoken meditation followed by a shared time of silence. And the spoken meditation is simply this. I ask for that opening hymn to invite us all into the thought of wondering how it would feel if every one of us were free. We'll now be in meditation together.
Morning is Mattering, an original written by a gay high school student and adapted by Reverend Mark Hicks. My father asked me if I'm gay. I asked, does it matter? He said, no, not really. I said, yes. He said, get out of my life. I guess it mattered. My friend asked why I talked about race so much. I asked, does it matter? He said, no, not really. I told him yes. He said, you need to get that chip off your shoulder. I guess it mattered. My neighbor asked why I put a ramp up to my front door. I said, does it matter? He said, no, not really. I told him because it makes my life easier. He said, is there a way to make it less obvious? I guess it mattered. My God asked me, do you love yourself? I said, does it matter? She said, yes. I said, how can I love myself? I am a gay, Latino, disabled, in a hostile climate. She said that it was the way I made you. Nothing will ever matter again.
So 7 years ago, when I came out as transgender, I whispered the words, filled with such shame at my truth, that even in my UU congregation, the one that I attended at the time, I couldn't turn the volume up on my phone. I couldn't turn the volume up on my voice high enough to really claim those words fully. I am transgender. It's a lot easier now. And I knew what it meant, and yet I had no idea. Here's what I did know. I knew that my marriage would end. I knew that I'd have to explain, justify myself to person after person in my life, managing their grief, anxiety, judgment, fear, not understanding, managing all of that while trying to follow my inner truth. I knew that society could be harsh and judgmental, and that whatever period I spent changing my body, my voice, my appearance, that at best this would be an uncomfortable one, and at worst a very dangerous one. But there was so much I also didn't foresee as I began this journey. It was a complete shock when a job I had lined up, a ministry role in a hospital, was rescinded because I was told that my lack of being clearly male or female would be too uncomfortable for the patients to bear. I didn't know that my changing body, still something that I was getting comfortable with, would be such a focus of fascination to people that barely knew me, that complete strangers would feel free to ask what genitalia I do or don't have, and somehow believe that they had a right to inquire or speculate. And I was shocked again by the complicated recognition that when my appearance became more masculine, society treated me so much better than it ever had as a woman. Still shocks me. This isn't to say there weren't benefits. There were and there are. I had no idea of the kindness of friends, the ones who would stand by me, loving me as I figured out how to love myself and my changing body. It was a shock to learn how much I would eventually love myself, my body, in a way that I never had been able to before. And I was surprised too, and I say this looking at my partner out there, and I won't point her out, to recognize that love still existed for me in this world. That as I claimed myself, my voice also emerged. And it turns out I have a lot to say, and I've lost my fear of saying it. And my friends, that is all thanks to gender transition. So as we end this week of Fantasia Fair, this, as you all know, this week-long transgender gathering here in Provincetown, I can't help but think of all the beautiful individuals going back home, some from places quite far away, who, while they were here, got to be more of who they actually are, with so much less fear of retribution from a community that might otherwise vilify them. And I keep thinking especially of those who fought their way, and they were mentioned earlier, for transgender rights, of the elders and the ancestors to whom we owe our relative freedoms. Freedoms that are up for grabs, as you well know. As we wait for the Supreme Court decisions on cases that will impact us, the queer community is holding its collective breath. How bad will it be? What hard-won rights will be lost? And how much of our progress will be rescinded? And many of our rights, the transgender community, to the extent they existed, have already been lost or are in jeopardy, from bathroom access to protections at school and access to medical care. And I never thought I'd say this from the pulpit, but the evilness of this administration has ensured that, and sadly the courts have largely, not entirely, stamped their approval. I don't have any question that it's going to get worse before it gets better for the transgender community. When I first transitioned, I didn't get the privilege that I carry and the ways that would protect me from the brutality and violence among those who live outside the gender binary, against trans women, and especially against transgender people of color. The vitriol, the violence, it's terrifying, more than I have words for. And as I watch this country accept the jailing of asylum seekers at our southern border, it's disheartening to recognize how much of our population is remaining silent as detention spreads across the country. Because I know who they're coming for next. I mean, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, but I'm also a Jew. And one doesn't have to go that far back in history to remember it's the so-called deviants who are jailed next, as society follows a pattern of repression and fear. And I know that there are some in this room that might dismiss that statement, and I beg you not to. So much of our transgender community is terrified, and they have every right to feel that way. So when we're here on Sunday morning together, it's so possible and important to celebrate the transgender community. And I give you kudos. How great is it here in this town, here in Provincetown, to say loudly, "You're safe here." What a wonderful and incredible beginning. And we live in this beautiful bubble, and it is a bubble. And Unitarian Universalism calls us to do yet more. As I said, I'm privileged. I have economic safety, a job I love, racial privilege, positional privilege, I'm the one with the mic this morning, and so many other forms of protection. But I'm the anomaly. So many of our siblings, our transgender siblings, are struggling and dying through no fault of their own. I think I can honestly say that everyone that I know personally who is non-binary has had a really hard time, if not an impossible time, finding work. They get discriminated against for housing. They've withstood regular abuse just going through the motions of daily life. When I came out, I kept hearing, "You're so brave." And it irritated me to no end, but I couldn't figure out why. Because I thought, there's nothing brave about what I'm doing. If I could not have done it at the time, I would not have done it at the time. It would have been easier to stay happily repressed in a female body that didn't fit me in the least. But the least the world would understand and not judge. But here's why I'm talking about this morning, this difficult and for some uncomfortable topic. Because claiming one's gender in an unwelcoming world is in fact an act of bravery. Again and again, we have to say in some form, "This is who I am. I'm not apologizing for it, and I'm not justifying it to you." It is so hard to walk through the world as other. But it's also the most freeing thing I can imagine, to live into one's whole truth. The congregation that I'm lucky enough to serve in Southern Rhode Island hears from me frequently that all scripture comes down to a few basic stories. It doesn't matter whether it's Jewish or Hindu or Christian or Muslim. They're stories of people that encounter difficulty, have a revelation, and go forth changed. We gather on Sunday morning for exactly this purpose, because there are parts of ourselves, each of us and all of us, unclaimed, to be claimed and healed. So if you go back to what some call the Old Testament, the story of Adam and Eve, that choice is really clear. You know the story, I'm guessing. God says, "Here's paradise, but you have to live within my rules. You can't seek knowledge. You can't know freedom. And I get to say who you are. And if you do all that, I'll take care of you." It's a really bad offer. And Eve knows this from the outset. And if you ask me, this is another form of state repression. Can you live in a world in which we remain inside our beautiful bubble? Or do we do as Eve did and say, no, there are so much more outside these doors? I will risk all the beauty and safety in favor of a life fully lived. In a poem entitled The Autobiography of Eve, Ansel Elkins writes it this way: "Wearing nothing but snakeskin, I blazed a footpath, the first radical road out of that old kingdom toward a new unknown. And when I came to those great flaming gates of burning gold, I stood alone in terror at the threshold between paradise and earth. And there I heard a mysterious echo, my own voice, singing to me from across the forbidden side. I shook awake, at once alive in a blaze of green fire. Let it be known, I did not fall from grace. I leapt to freedom. My friends, that's why we gather each week, to seek freedom. Freedoms from the fears that hold us back, that have us say no when we'd rather say yes. Freedom from those that judge and maybe even hate us, solely for claiming more of who we are. Freedoms from the notion that put people in boxes, in walled gardens, forcing us to choose between safety and a life fully lived. I can't imagine a choice other than freedom. So as we close this week, celebrating the beauty and the resilience of the transgender community, I urge those of you that are not of that community, all of you allies, to make it known that you stand on our side, and that you are ready to fight for the rights of transgender beloveds. In the words of transgender icon and activist Marsha P. Johnson, history isn't something you look back and say it was inevitable. Together, we have to fight for a world which holds the transgender community as dearly as they were held here in Provincetown this week. We can and we must create a world in which we all know safety. Let us together take that leap to freedom. Blessed be.